All right, Juliana and Sheila, you're still with us. I've never had to do that in a webinar before, and I wasn't sure how it would impact folks, but it seems like folks are coming back in. Sorry about that. That is a glitch in Zoom, and it has never happened to me in a pre-prep hour before. So I'm glad that folks are finding their way back in. Sorry for the disruption. Hopefully it won't happen again. Give folks a second to get settled back in. Cool. So I was saying you might be surprised. The other reason it's important, you need to be able to track your improvement. Studying for the GRE can take a few months. That's a long time to stick with a task. And in order to stay excited about that, it helps to see that you're improving. So if you know where you started, you'll be able to sort of note and celebrate the things that get better later on. And that's incredibly useful. You need to have a rough sense of what challenge you're facing, you know, what's going to happen to you. You're going to get nervous. Are you going to rush? Are you going to get stuck? Like, just how are you going to react to the time? And finally, kind of going back to what I was saying when I said you might be surprised, you want to get a sense of how to prioritize in your studying. So quant and verbal the same, equal time. One is weaker, more time on that. You need to be able to kind of calibrate your limited time effectively, and taking a practice test will help you figure that out. So that's the very first thing you're going to do. Just take that practice test. After you take the practice test, I would do a little review, mostly just to note what's good. As you study more, then you can circle back and retry the problems you missed. But when you're just starting out and maybe you need to brush up on a lot of quant concepts or learn a lot of vocab words, I wouldn't sink a ton of time into reviewing this first practice test. I just kind of note, oh, I'm already kind of good at geometry. Cool, good to know. Then as you get deeper in your studying, maybe you circle back and look at it. But really just to get that rough exposure set a baseline. This practice test will also then help you start to get a sense of how much time overall you might want to budget for your prep. One of the most common questions they get is, how long is it going to take me to get ready for the test? And to know that, you really need to know two things. You need to know where are you starting, and then you need to know where do you want to go. So in addition to taking that practice test, the other thing I would do right away at the very start of your studies is find out what the median scores are for the programs you're applying to. So where do you ideally want to be? If they're not online, you can call or email them. It is the job of admissions officials to help you and to be welcoming, so they should be helpful and welcoming. If in a pinch you can't find information for a particular program, find another program that's similarly competitive. Look that up. And then set a range. You know, what's the highest median score of all your programs? Add 2 points to that. What's your floor? Lowest median scores for programs you're applying to. So you're ideally shooting for a range, and you can adjust as you go forward. Again, sometimes there are surprises. I've had students come and say, I really need to work on quant. They're applying to an English PhD. Their quant score is already at the median score for an English PhD. So sometimes this also may show you, oh, I really need to work on one aspect of this test. Maybe I'm actually closer than I thought with some other aspects. GRE scores vary a lot between different types of programs, so get that specific information for your program. For many folks, a rough budget for how long you'd spend preparing for this test is 3 months. That's kind of the typical timeline that I see maybe for 50% of my students. So I'm going to say it's average, but in scare quotes. I've had a student prepare really successfully in 2 weeks. I've had students prepare in 6 months or a year and be really successful. So there are lots of different timelines that work. 3 months is what I would ideally budget if you can. I know we're also coming up against some fall deadlines, so definitely you can condense it. It's just going to take a more aggressive work. If you are aiming for a high score increase, however, if you're like, I'm starting at 150, I really want to get to 165, then that may take more time overall. Can be done. I've seen all kinds of score increases happen. The big jumps can take a little more time, especially because as you get better, the test gets harder. So it's going to feel easier to go from 150 to 155 than it might to go from 160 to 165. That's a great question, Jay. I would think a little bit about the rest of your application and the type of program you're applying to. So for example, if you're applying to a program that does have some kind of math or quantitative component, like a statistics program or an MBA or public policy, and you don't have any other part of your application that shows that you can do quantitative work, then you might want a slightly higher quantitative score. But if you're like, nah, I've done, I have a job that I use my quantitative skills in, or I did a lot of undergrad coursework in math, then your quant score might not be as important. So I think a little bit about what does the rest of your application demonstrate? Is there anything that you would maybe want a test score to kind of bolster in that application? And if the answer to that is no, then maybe not, you know? Also, a lot of schools this year are going test optional. So that's something to look at too. Like, are the programs you're applying to still requiring the GRE? Because that's changing a lot these days. So the lesson may be, you take your practice test, you look up the scores and you realize you need to do a little work or maybe not a ton of work. And that could be a wonderful surprise. Ideally, I would say 6 to 12 hours a week of studying if you're thinking about this 3-month timeline. I know that sounds like a lot. I'm going to try and show you that that can be humane and doable at the end of tonight's session. It's totally fine if you spend less time in a week. It just might mean you need to stretch out the process over more time. I have a lot of students who have very demanding jobs or very demanding sort of personal and family commitments in their lives, or they're full-time students, and they find maybe they have 3 to 5 hours a week. They just take 4, 5, 6 months instead of 3 or 2. If you only have a month or 2, then you're definitely going to want to try and put in as much time as you reasonably can. All right, so that's sort of big picture, starting out, first 2 tasks. Figure out your goal, take a practice test. Maybe that'll give you a rough sense of the time that you want to budget. Maybe you have a deadline and you know how much time you have, and then that maybe gives you a sense of the intensity of the work you need to do. Weighing again the GRE against the rest of your application. This is only one component of that larger process. So once you've done those 2 things, what should you do next? I think first, spending a little bit of time just making sure you feel solid on the content. This could be a week, this could be 2 weeks, this could be a little more, depending especially on where you're at with math. A lot of people, myself included, come to this test not having done any math in years. I can attest to the fact that you can start from that place and get to a great place, but you'll definitely want to start by solidifying math facts. And I have a few different things that I think are helpful. Flashcards. Flashcards are great. Put those geometry rules on flashcards. Put those exponent rules on flashcards. Just repeat. Repetition is an enormously important part of remembering things. We have to see things on average 5 times to truly remember them. So you're going to be remembering and forgetting and repeating a lot in this process. Arushi, that's a great question. I think my answer to that is similar to my answer to Jay, and that if you feel that you need to sort of demonstrate something that is otherwise not demonstrated in your application, like, maybe if your undergraduate grades are not, or GPA is not as high as you would like it to be, sometimes showing a super high test score can be a balance to that. So if it will be a sort of positive supplement, or you'd want to reinforce something that you don't feel is as strong elsewhere in your application, then that I think could be a benefit. If the rest of your application feels very solid, then if it's optional, I don't think you need to do it. I don't think if you have a strong application, I don't think you necessarily will get bonus points for submitting a GRE, but it can be an alternate way to demonstrate a particular skill or aptitude. I cannot overstate the importance of times tables. I have seen so many students do great work and then get really frustrated by being slowed down by just the simple arithmetic part of the test. Because we don't use simple arithmetic very often. It makes sense. It's not a fluid skill for most of us as adults. So practice your times tables, get a times table chart, put it on your wall, do arithmetic drills. I'll put this link in the chat, but arithmetic.zetamac.com is a nice timed arithmetic game that I really like. There's a bunch of other good ones online. Drill those simple arithmetic facts. Especially if you haven't done math in a while, start with the easy stuff. Start with the easy problems. From whatever book or resource you're working from, start with stuff on the easier end. Focus first on understanding the concepts. Then you can start layering in the kind of GRE tricks and traps on top of that. But if the content isn't solid, that higher level problem solving stuff is going to get frustrating. And then I said this before, I'll say it again, you're going to have to repeat. You're going to study fractions today, you're going to come back in 3 days, you're going to have forgotten some of that stuff, you're going to have to solidify it. So kind of prepare to cycle through these topics a few times. It's how our brains work. We forget stuff real fast. So you need to repeat to solidify. And then really, as you are studying, be rigorous with yourself. If you feel a little shaky on something, come back to it the next day and see if you can get to feeling a little less shaky. Then maybe come back the next day. But try not to let yourself off the hook with being like, yeah, I think I understand that. Because that can also lead to problems later on where you have maybe a false sense of fluency with certain topics. So it's hard to do in practice. Just do your best to note. If you're not feeling good about something, that's okay. If you're stuck on it today, come back to it tomorrow, but do come back and repeat things. There are some excellent free resources for learning math online. The archived free prep hours on YouTube are really helpful. There's a lot of math topics covered there. Khan Academy has an amazing wealth of free instructional content. eMath Instruction is another one that's good. With Khan and with eMath Instruction, it covers more than the GRE. So just be careful to focus on GRE topics. And if you want to know what are GRE topics, the official guide will have a list of all math content. I'll talk a little bit more about the official guide in a second, but say like, okay, what is the algebra I need to know? Look it up in the official guide, find those videos on Khan Academy. It's really great. Lots of free stuff. If you want books, these are the strategy guides that we make. These would also be a good place to teach yourself math content and strategy from. Topics are explained, I think, in very thorough detail in both math and verbal. And then we also make an online self-paced course. If you wanted something that was like a little more structured, that had more of an audio-visual component, that was specifically GRE, this could be a place to start. You can do a free trial and see if you like it. So just a couple other resources. Like I said, there's lots of good free stuff online. Other thing you want to do right away, solidify math facts, start learning vocab right away, because the GRE tests a huge pool of words. There's no finite GRE vocab list. So when we think about studying vocab, it is important to accept you're going to run out of time before you run out of words. So the idea is pick a goal for how many words you're going to learn each week. This can be as low as 15. This can be as high as 50. This should not be higher than 50. I promise you, it is pretty much impossible for anyone to realistically retain more than 50 new words a week. I've seen people try. It was not happy. 50 is a lot. Really learning 50 words a week, that's going to take you 4 or 5 hours. So you can do 50 a week if you know that vocab is a big hurdle for you with this test. If you learn 50 words a week for 3 months, you're going to be a lot better off going into the test. So this is very much something you can impact with hard work. Again, balancing it against what else you have to do. If you're like, I really need to focus more on quant, then maybe you learn 10 to 15 words a week. Picking a goal and sticking with it and making it a goal that you can realistically achieve each week, that is way more important. Being consistent over time, way more important than trying to just cram in 1,000,000 words this week, burning out, never learning words again. So I'd rather everyone picks a lower goal and they stick with it and they are consistent in it over a long period of time rather than sort of cramming. The other thing that is really important is to have good flashcards. So I would avoid flashcards like this. I would avoid simple word definition flashcards. This is not a particularly exciting definition. You know, it reuses the word. That's always a terrible thing. And you're not really going to know much about how to use this word. It's going to take you a really long time to learn this word with this flashcard because you're really just trying to kind of brute force a word and a definition together. That's a great question, MK. To be honest, we don't know. The ETS doesn't disclose a lot of test materials. They have the official guide and then 2 supplemental guides and a couple of online practice tests. And based on those materials, I think Manhattan Prep or most test prep companies will try to put together lists of words that they think are slightly more likely to appear on the GRE. You don't see a ton of repeated words in those published materials, and then they very closely guard the material that's currently being used on the test. I will say that one type of word they really like words that have a familiar definition and then an unusual definition. So one example of that would be the word sap, which has, you know, a common definition that we know, has a couple less common. Drain energy from, or as a noun, sort of fool, gullible person. So that kind of thing, I think they really like, where it's like, oh, we're all going to know a word, but then there's some weird other definitions we might not be as familiar with. So good flashcards have a lot of components. They take a little work, but they're worth it. Simple definition, funny, creative, humorous, personal, emotional mnemonics. Like the more emotionally connected to your flashcards are, the faster you learn the words. Our brains are built to better remember the things we have strong emotional responses to. Etymology is an amazing tool for learning words. I love it. That's a great point to bring up. Etymologies are super fun. They'll tell you about the roots of the word. It'll help you figure out related words. It'll tell you about the history of the word, and that's a nice way to remember. So you could put the etymology on your flashcard too. Google etymology is good. There's a site called etymonline.com that I like. So that could be another thing to put on your flashcard. So just to show you a better version of vituperate. Simple definition, negative word. I know how to use it. Some different examples to kind of get it to stick in my memory. And then as I learn related words, I'll put them on that flashcard. So once I learn vituperate, I can start connecting it to maybe other words I'm trying to learn to help reinforce those. Takes more time to learn a word like this, but it takes more time to make a flashcard like this, but you will learn the word faster. I said that and I was like, that doesn't make sense. I think on average, this will save you a minute per word. And if you're thinking about learning 50 words a week over the course of 8, 12, 15 weeks, that's a lot of minutes. So invest in making good flashcards up front. You will thank yourself down the line. If you already have pre-made flashcards and you really like them, great, keep using those. Just add things to them, like add stickers, add your own sentences, just tweak them to make them a little more personal. And that can be a great way to kind of increase the effectiveness of your pre-made flashcards. At the end of the day, the vocab system that you're going to use is the best one. So making your own rich flashcards is ideal. If you know you're never going to get around to doing that and you prefer to use an app, there are lots of great apps out there too. And there's some apps like Anki, I'll put that in the chat, that allow you to make your own digital flashcards. So start with the math content, start learning words. As you get into doing that, maybe after the first week or two, the other really important thing to start doing early on is start learning and practicing consistent processes for the major question types. So this would be quantitative comparison, discrete quant, and data interpretation and quant. And I'll show you what all of these look like in a second. So it would be reading comp, text completion, and sentence equivalence in verbal. So for each of these different question types, you want to figure out what is the step-by-step process I'll follow when I see this format, and then be really consistent about doing that. One thing that can be really helpful is write down all your processes. Keep your cheat sheet with you as you study, so that every time you're following the same steps for each problem type. This is going to be enormously helpful. This is often the key to doing questions accurately and quickly. However, in your first few weeks, do not time yourself. I would say like first 3, maybe even 4 weeks, only untimed practice. Until your processes are solid, until your content knowledge is solid, don't put that extra pressure on yourself. I think trying to learn things and execute them quickly at the same time is actually going to slow you down overall. So yes, you're going to want to be doing timed practice for sure. Just give yourself a few weeks of untimed work to set a really good foundation. Just to show you these different question types, I'm not going to go into the specific processes for question types right now because it's a long discussion, and I also don't think it would be that helpful for me to just tell them to you. They'll give you some suggestions of where to find information about these. Past free prep hour, actually, same things I said earlier, strategy guides, past free prep hours, Interact, those are all good places for strategy knowledge. Verbal, always we're going to see this order. So we're going to do text completion, we're going to do reading comp, we're going to do sentence equivalence, we're going to do reading comp. These are text completion. This is one of the 2 types of vocab questions. You have 1, 2, or 3 blanks and either 5 or 3 answer choices. You just pick the word that best fits in each blank. One really important thing to know starting out, I think a common misconception is that vocab questions are just about, do you know the words or not? And they're not. They're very much also about reading. So yes, sometimes you're going to see really hard words in the answers. Sometimes you're going to see more common words in the answers. And it really is just testing your reading of the sentence. So it's really important as you're learning vocab words, also be learning strategy and process for these specific question types as well. Those 2 things need to go hand in hand with vocab questions. There's a second type of vocab question called sentence equivalence. This is where you're going to see 6 answer choices, and those 6 choices will have little boxes next to them. This is where you must pick 2. You must pick 2 words that fit the sentence and match each other. I apologize for my dog. My roommate came home and she always barks at him, even though we have lived here for 2 years. She will stop. So you must choose 2. Those words must match each other. That's also a very common error starting out with these, is to only pick 1 or pick 2 words that fit the sentence but don't match with each other. Reading, tons of different tasks in reading. You're going to see 1 or 2 long passages. I'll show you what those look like, where you have to scroll up and down. Most of the passages will be short enough to all fit on the screen. Some are going to ask you about content. Some are going to ask you about logic. So we have kind of 3 big categories of challenge in reading. We have a long passage, we have a content passage that's short, and we have a logic passage that's also quite short. And you want to have a process for each of these different types. So a process for dealing with the long passage, which is going to have a scroll bar, going to have multiple questions. You'll want to have a process for dealing with a short passage where you're being asked about the content of the passage. And then you want to have a process for logic, where you have a very short passage and you're being asked something about the author's argument or reasoning. And you need to respond to that. Within these categories, there's definitely subtypes of questions, and you will get to sort of more granular subtypes of reading questions as well. But that's a big overview of the different tasks that you'll be building processes for. Quant is similar. We have 4 different blocks in a quant section. First, we do comparisons, then we do discrete quant, then we do graphs, then we do more discrete quant. Again, you'll want to have a process for quantitative comparison, which look like this. So process for dealing with these. You'll see all different types of content in these quantitative comparisons, but you'll always use a similar process for each one. Discrete quant, you'll again see a lot of different types of content. You'll also see a couple different formats. Pick one multiple choice, pick more than one multiple choice, and fill in the blank. Again, even though we see different content, see different formats, you're going to still want to have a core step-by-step process when you get discrete quant. What do I look at first? What do I look at second? Graphs. You get 1 or 2 graphs, and then you get 3 or 4 questions that all ask about those same graphs. It's a little bit like reading, actually, like having a reading passage and multiple questions. Again, you're going to build a consistent process for that. So starting out, as you get into building these processes, you're learning math content, learning vocab, and then you're starting to build processes for these question types. You're going to want practice questions. 2 great books that I think are really useful to have. Official guide. You must have the official guide if you're preparing for the GRE. If you don't have it already, that's the first thing you should do, get the official guide. The problems in here are mostly questions that were at one point on the official test. So if you're thinking about practice problems that approximate the official GRE, this is the closest you're going to get. Great practice problems. This book also has explanations of all the math concepts. My experience and the experience of many of my students is that those explanations are very confusing. So if you get confused, look up the same topic in Khan Academy or another source. You know, this book will tell you what topics are tested, but to learn those concepts, I would probably turn to a different resource. You'll probably do all the practice problems in this book, to be honest, at some point. You will run through all the official guide questions. It's not an exhaustive book. If you want a lot more practice questions, this would be a good second book to get. This book has more practice problems than you should do. You know, you won't run out. It's organized by topic. So if you need like targeted topic practice, say with circles and cylinders, there's a whole chapter of that. Chapters start easy and end hard. So if you're, for example, at that beginning phase where you're building math knowledge, do the first 5 or 6 problems in each chapter, because those will be more drill-like, more foundational. When you start getting ready to deal with harder stuff, you can move deeper into the chapters. All right. So starting out, you're going to be doing a lot of individual problems. You're going to be doing a lot of untimed work. That's really important, just untimed problem by problem to build process, to build content knowledge. This, however, is going to set the foundation, but it's not very test-like. So you will also be doing some practice tests. I would say do one now, wait 3 to 6 weeks, then do another. After that, every 2 to 3 weeks. That would be my rough suggestion for a practice test schedule. The reason why I say wait a bit at the start is it's going to take you some time to build those foundations. So set solid foundations. Then once you have that down, you can put pressure on it with a practice test. Really, really common mistake is to just take a bunch of practice tests close together right away. I've done it. I've made that mistake because I'm like, oh, maybe if I take another one, I'll get a better score and I'll be done. Like, it's a little bit for me laziness and magical thinking. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. Practice tests are great assessment tools. They're great when you're like, okay, I think I've gotten better. I want to check in. But just doing a bunch of them isn't by itself going to build skills and yield improvement. And if your score, you know, you keep taking them and your score stays the same, it's just psychologically discouraging. So once you've got the foundations down, you're going to start shifting a lot of your practice to doing mixed timed sets where you take a group of 5, 6, up to 10, 15 problems, set a timer and do them. You can do these every day. They're short, so you can really review them and learn from them. And you're practicing in a test-like way where you're shifting topics, shifting formats, mixing up different things, and getting to practice timing as well as just executing your processes and your skills. So first few weeks, you're going to be doing a lot of individual problems. Once you get out of that foundational phase where the content and processes are feeling solid, you're going to be doing a lot of mixed time practice. One of the most important things to keep in mind starting out is that it is the quality of your review of problems that I think is one of the primary predictors of success. It's not so much the quantity of problems done, although some quantity is important. So you see lots of different stuff. But really, when I see students making strong improvement, it often comes from how they're reviewing and thinking about the questions that they're doing. So if you're reviewing a group of problems, just a couple tips. Time set, think about it overall first. Overall timing decisions, overall mindset and mood. Big picture, what did you do that was good? What would you maybe do differently? Then get into question by question. Don't always turn to the explanation right away, whether you're doing a time set or an individual question. Explanations can be helpful, but really push yourself to figure things out first. I'm kind of stuck. Like, okay, let me go look up a concept in a book or look back at my notes. Let me see if I can figure this out before I turn to the explanation. Maybe I just know what the correct answer is. Okay, now that I know D is right, can I figure out how to get there? And then finally, maybe I just read the start of an explanation. I say like, okay, I know how to begin. Can I work it out from there? So I'm really trying to use as little of the explanation as I can when I try to figure out a problem that's giving me trouble. It's going to build much stronger and more resilient skills. You're really going to understand it better if you do this. You'll get a lot more value out of the problems you do if you really challenge yourself. Final thing, once you've done a problem, understood it, you're never going to see that particular problem on the official test. So you want to find something in that problem to learn that you can use next time. Like, okay, next time I see a problem like this, what do I want to do? What does this teach me that's important about the test? That's one of the really, really key habits of folks who see improvement. The other tool that is enormously helpful is to have some kind of log where you track the questions that are giving you trouble. I would start using this when you get to the time set phase. So when you're just really kind of relearning the math, learning the processes, I don't think you need to do this as much. But once you get to that point where you're doing a lot of practice and strategy work with those time sets, then I would start keeping a record. So I had trouble with this problem. I'm going to note down where it is. I'm going to take some time to really pinpoint why I got it wrong. I'm going to decide what I'm going to do differently next time to not make that mistake. And I'm going to think about what I can learn from it, big picture. So I'm going to spend some time really thinking about these problems that I miss. I'm going to track them all in one place. This way, over time, you can notice patterns. So that instead of having to fix issues one at a time as they crop up, you can come up with bigger picture solutions. Like, oh, I got a bunch of problems wrong because I rushed. So I'm going to focus on what are 3 things I can do to slow myself down so that I don't rush. Things like that. Being rigorous about sort of reflecting, finding takeaways, and keeping some kind of review log are both enormously common in students who I see improve a lot. So I highly, highly recommend this as a really great study tool. It's a tool that I used when I was hired. I had to do some work to bring my quant score up. I did not have a 99th percentile quant score. I definitely had to work on it. And this is a tool that I used a lot to improve, because for me, making small errors was one of the big issues. And this helped me realize I don't always make new small errors and make the same small errors over and over again. Then it was easier to fix them. So that's kind of my big picture charting out of the pathway. I do want to spend a little bit of time just talking about what are you going to do when you sit down each day? Because I think that's also a hurdle. Like, all right, I'm here. I got my book. What do I do? I'm a big fan of short sessions. So I would maybe budget my time in like 30, 60-minute increments. If I only have 30 minutes, I'm just going to do a few problems. Be like, maybe I'll do 5 problems, 6 problems, pick a content area that maybe I'm focusing on, do a really good job of reviewing those problems. So if I have 30 minutes, I'm going to spend maybe 10 minutes actually doing problems. I'm going to spend 20 minutes reviewing those problems. I'm always reviewing more than the time I spend doing. If I have an hour, I'll do some problems, I'll review them. I'll then spend some time maybe reading or watching a video to reinforce knowledge of a concept or a process. Then I'll come back and try a couple of those problems again. So always within study sessions, I am mixing tasks. I'm not just doing, all quant or all verbal or all geometry. I'm trying to, within study sessions, mix things up a bit too. Short, frequent, rather than 10 hours on Saturday. It's hard to do, I know, when you're working full time. I'll show you a schedule in a moment to suggest how that can be done. But I cannot advocate enough for trying to find little blocks of time in your day, not letting it all pile up on weekends. In part, like I said, we need a lot of repetition. And if you're just doing 5 hours on Saturday, it's going to take you a lot of Saturdays to get the repetition that you need. Whereas if you're doing even just 30 minutes Monday through Friday, that's going to actually help you remember things a lot better. Ideally, at least 6. If you can't swing 6, it's okay. Just again, maybe budgeting longer time. 10 to 12 in a 3-month horizon, I think would be ideal. Don't ruin your life. Still, you need to rest. You need to relax, especially right now. Being rested, being sort of mentally sharp is really important. If you're super burnt out, throwing more study time in it isn't going to help. So again, that's why I think short, frequent sessions are helpful. It keeps your brain fresher. Make a calendar each week. This is a long haul. It's a big task. I know it can be really tough. I've been through it. I also know it's really hard to make time for something that you are just doing for yourself and that no one is paying you to do. So my other really big suggestion is at the start of each week, sit down, whatever calendar you use, block out the time you're going to study. If you do that, you're way more likely to get it done. Here's an example of what that could look like. This is a lot of questions, a lot of time. It's over 14 hours. But aside from a practice test, there's no single block that's longer than an hour and a half. So find little bits of time on the weekdays, maybe half an hour before work, half an hour after work, half an hour after dinner, where you can fit in these short, frequent chunks. Sometimes I've fallen into the trap of being like, oh, I only have 20 minutes. I can't do anything. I'll just sit here and scroll through Instagram. You can get a lot done in 20 minutes. Use it. If you use those little 20-minute blocks that you aren't currently using that much, you can actually fit in a lot of time without overwhelming your life. So short and frequent study sessions. Take notes on your work. Make flashcards as you go. Find a takeaway for every problem. And then again, within each block of studying, try to mix different topics. Don't just kind of sit with quant for a long time, sit with verbal for a long time. That's what I got about where to start. It's a lot. I feel like I've just talked a lot at all of you, which is definitely typically not how I teach, but I wanted to answer this question of where to start, and then I realized I had a lot to say about it. So I hope wherever you're at, you found something helpful to take with you today. We have a few minutes, so if folks have questions, I'm happy to do just kind of some open Q&A time. I know I also need to pull up a slide, so I'll try to do that. But yeah, let me know in the chat what questions you got. Can be big picture, small picture. We got a little time today. Don't always get a little time in these. Oh, yeah. I think, let me just get this. Is this, someone asked me for a slide earlier. I think maybe it was Julianne. Is this the slide you wanted? Yeah. Yeah, I'll outline a couple important process things. That's a great question. This is just going to be a quick rundown. Cool. Yay. Quantitative comparison. Unpack the upfront info first, then try to simplify or unpack the quantities, then test numbers if you need to. Super important that you do these steps in this order. Common mistake is to immediately start plugging in numbers in quantitative comparison. So make your life easier. Discrete quant. Understand what the question asks. Process the info given. Make a plan. Pick a strategy. Then solve. Again, common mistake in discrete quant is to just rush into getting the math on the paper, solve for the wrong thing, choose an inefficient method that leads to all kinds of issues. So always with math, like slow down at the start, then you can be more efficient at the end in the solving. But give yourself space to breathe up front and just notice what's there and give your mind room to process it at the beginning. For graphs, read the graph first. Get really clear on what's going on. That's my big tip for graphs. For verbal, for all of verbal, there's a lot of process nuance in verbal, so I'm going to give you just one really, really simple piece of advice. Always predict an answer before you look at the answer choices. Know what you're looking for. This is true for every type of reading question. This is true for both types of vocab questions. If you look at the answer choices too soon, they're way more likely to confuse you. You're way more likely to fall into traps. So always, no matter what question type it is, read the question stem. Don't read the answers right away. Get an idea of what you think the answer should be. Then look at your answer choices. Super, super important. I think a lot of times early on, folks get into trouble jumping into the answer choices. So that is my attempt to give a short answer to a very involved question, and hopefully at least gives you a place to start thinking about some of these different processes. I got a question, I think a question about if you have like a quant score that's very different from a verbal score starting out. Definitely, I would say put a lot more time into the weaker score and really focus on that. But even if you let's say your verbal score is pretty much where you want it to be and your quant score is not, still do a tiny bit of verbal practice just to maintain that score. Over time, if you don't practice something at all, the score can start to slide a little. So maybe you put 90% of your time into quant, but you'll still want to occasionally do some verbal problems to keep that skill strong. Any other questions from folks? Cool. Well, I will be back in a free pep hour on November 17th. It's going to be probably some kind of advanced verbal topic, maybe inference questions. I'll try to let folks know in advance. So that session will be a lot more problem solving discussion than a lot less of me talking, but hope something in tonight's session was useful. Good luck in your studies. I hope it goes well. Have a good night. You're welcome. Cool. Bye, guys.